In just 2 weeks, on July 20th, a Massachusetts courtroom will be center stage for one of the most agonizing high-stakes trial this year. Good evening and welcome to the Margaret McLean Show. If you're new here, I'm a former prosecutor, trial lawyer, and law professor. And on this channel, we translate the law and take you behind the scenes in the courtroom. So, Commonwealth versus Lindsay Clancy. Most of the facts of what happened in Duxbury, Massachusetts are not in dispute. The defense admits that Lindsay Clancy took the lives of her 3 beautiful young children. But the entire soul of this case rests on one terrifying question. Why did she do it? Why? Is it a case of cold, calculated deliberation, as the prosecution argues, pointing to a window of time when Lindsay's husband, Patrick, left the house to get takeout that she ordered, which gave her the opportunity to get rid of her 3 children in cold blood with exercise straps? After she committed these heinous acts, she jumped off the roof in an attempt to kill herself, but failed. So now she's paralyzed for the rest of her life. So there's that. Or was this a tragic, involuntary byproduct of severe postpartum psychosis and overmedication? Was Lindsay suffering from a severe break from reality? To understand how a jury untangles intent from insanity, you have to look to history. And tonight, we are joined by Tommy Pope. He's the former solicitor and current South Carolina state representative. So I'm so happy to have him on the channel. And I am going to bring him up here. And Tom, before I bring him up, though, I do want to say that Tommy knows about this dark terrain better than anyone else. In 1995, there was a woman, a young mother in South Carolina named Susan Smith. And if you recall, because I certainly do, she shocked the nation by drowning her two young sons, 3-year-old Michael and 14-month-old Alexander. I remember this. It's just awful. She strapped them into their car seats and rolled them into a lake. And the motive? She wanted a lover and no longer wanted her children. Now, of course, the defense argued that she was so depressed and suicidal. So I see parallels here. The man tasked with carrying the weight of that prosecution, demanding the death penalty, and seeking justice for those children is former solicitor and current South Carolina state representative, Tommy Pope. And Tommy, I'm going to bring you up right now. Let's see here. 1 second. Add to stage. Aha. There you are. Technology, right?
There you go.
Yeah. So thank you so much for joining me on the Margaret McLean Show. I really appreciate it. So I'm going to start with this. Tommy, you prosecuted Susan Smith 3 decades ago. When you look at the upcoming Lindsay Clancy case, what are the striking similarities, and more importantly, the most critical differences that a prosecutor must navigate in a case like this?
Well, I think starting with your similarities, obviously, is the death of children. I hate to say it, but over the years, I think we've become numb to that because we're seeing it happen more and more frequently. Back in the day when this occurred, it was almost unheard of. I mean, I'm a former law enforcement officer. I was a state police officer before I was a prosecutor. And so I remember I had 2 counties and I was being called every night by the SLED agents. That's what we call our state law enforcement. And kind of getting an update. And I truly believe, one, because she alleged a carjacker, which could obviously be a whole nother show, but alleged a carjacker took the kids. And I never, carjacker is a carjacker for a reason. They get cars, then they might get your money, then they might sexually assault a female, but no carjacker is taking children.
Right.
So when that occurred, I really thought that she had them stashed with her cousin at the beach, or something, that it was more of a domestic thing. I
Hmm.
remember back then, and again nowadays we probably think a little more. I mean, you look at Casey Anthony and some of those others, we think more toward the mother could do this, but back then it was just unheard of. And so I see, the similarities of the death of the children. I think there are a lot of differences, maybe not in ultimate motivation, because I would say anybody that takes the life, well, let's start even broader. Anybody that takes the life of someone else, short of warfare or some
Yeah.
protecting others, is something's wrong.
Yeah.
Something that we were taught as kids is not there. So the question then becomes, and as you had alluded to earlier, is knowing legal and moral right from legal and moral wrong. And so you got to say something's wrong with anybody that could hurt a child, period, much less your child, and in the physical nature of the way it was done, the hands-on aspect, that something's got to be wrong, but does it absolve you of the crime? And so, looking at Smith, I always said, and this is where we start seeing our differences, her defense claims she was suicidal. Well, she rolled the kids down the lake, and we always say that best lies are wrapped in the truth. Like she said, she asked the carjacker to get her kids, but they said the carjacker said they didn't have time, and they were crying for their mother. Well, I believe that, as she rolled them in the lake. But she rolled them in the lake with her wedding album, her wedding dress. I said everything that symbolized her marriage, short of putting her husband in the trunk, was there. So she did it selfishly. The defense said suicide, but when she got to the house and came up with the story, she wasn't wet. She wasn't scraped up. We actually tested vehicles later in her vehicle to, flotation characteristics, how long it rolled down, things of that nature. And it didn't add up. How can I be so depressed I'm gonna commit suicide, and then somehow I change my mind, but I don't change the mind for the kids? Just put on the brake. But I think,
Yeah.
in this circumstance, and it really puts an interesting twist and a difficulty for the prosecutor, the fact that she's now paralyzed,
Mm.
at least to me, shows kind of a different level of, truly she was suicidal. Now, maybe the prosecution's got an argument that there's plenty of other ways you could commit suicide. You have to be careful with the jury on that, to
Yeah.
not be indelicate. You've been in the courtroom, I
Yeah.
mean, we get kind of callous sometimes, but so I think that distinction is there too.
Yeah, and they're gonna be wheeling her into the courtroom in a wheelchair, And
Mhm.
so I'm wondering, and I'm gonna play a few clips from the arraignment later on, but right away, I'm wondering if jurors will have some sympathy for her and maybe think that's punishment for the rest of her life, knowing that she killed her kids and now she's gonna be suffering with it in a wheelchair, so let her suffer that way.
Yeah, I think too, I thought that's what I thought when I first saw the case. I think it's a sympathy thing. They always tell you, the jury's not supposed to decide on passion or sympathy, but they're human. We put
Right.
12 humans in the box. And so I think you're right. I think that makes a difference. The argument to me is always why, if you're suicidal, then take your own life. Again, not to be callous, but you don't have to kill those 3 kids to end your life. And again, it's tragic we're even talking about that, but let them have a chance.
Oh, absolutely. And from all accounts, I actually know someone who worked with her at the hospital. And from all accounts, she was a great mother. So, and look at her here with the kids. I mean, she didn't have a relationship problem, or she didn't want to get rid of, in your case, Susan Smith case. Yeah. So and she did not have postpartum depression with the first 2 children. But, then all of a sudden this happens. I just have a real hard time with it.
Yeah, and I think obviously postpartum is a real thing. I mean, the older I've gotten, heck, I think we all battle, some variation of depression or whatever the case may be. But there's ways to sort it out. I mean, let's separate out just suicide. Obviously you don't ever condone suicide, but sometimes you see why it happens when people feel isolated and hopeless. So I'll give you that, but I don't think you can make the jump to a justification that would take children's lives.
I agree with you there. So I'm thinking she snapped and went into severe psychosis. I don't know if I've seen people in severe
Right.
psychosis where they actually are imagining that people are there. They're imagining they think they might think they're somebody else, like they're related to a famous actor. So I've seen this before, and I'm just wondering if that's what happened from the combination of the meds, and all of a sudden she just went into a period of psychosis. And I think it's going to be hard for people to understand that.
Yeah, and I think it's hard too, and that's the problem. Again, I've become more mellow in my post-prosecution days, but it's hard to know, kind of like on social media now, you don't know what to believe, and with AI, you don't know, seeing's not even believing now, but it's like when the experts come in, to me, it's almost like crying wolf from the standpoint, prosecutor's job is to do justice and not to seek vengeance, and so and I actually had a case one time where the guy literally thought he was building an altar to the Lord, and by sacrificing his aging mother, he was sending. So I mean, that was the only one I ever had that I truly saw that he needed to go to the state hospital. Now, the problem for your community when that happens is sometimes it's, at least here in South Carolina, we're so ill-equipped to deal with mental health issues that they basically house them, do the best they can, and next thing you know, they're out on the street again. Not necessarily committing the same crime, but that's a community concern. So, but I think the mental health component, the hard thing is, who will a jury believe as an expert? Because every death penalty case I've ever tried, there's somebody on the other side that, they'd start out there. I got a guy on death row now that killed his mother while her father was in the shower, then killed the father, sprayed him with Tilex and blinded him as he came out. But his expert said, he had no choice but violence. He was abused and all this stuff. And the best, when I start cross-examining, you get into maybe daddy hit him one time. My dad was the sheriff. My dad was a big man. Big Albert hit me a lot of times, but I'm not saying and not in the face, but you know what I mean.
It was a different time too.
The old Southern whipping, so I absolutely, and I think I was better for it. But my point being, it's like crying wolf because they use that and it just wasn't legit. So when you do have one, I think it's a little suspect. And so, because I know there is mental health, but to me, I break it down. I battled in the past with depression, and nobody would think, Tommy Pope's always happy. Why would that be the case? But, I mean, and the crummy thing for me is depression when you don't, if you've lost a loved one, if you've had something bad happen, at least you can understand it. But when you wake up and everything's fine and you're depressed, then you get depressed for being depressed, So I recognize that can occur. But I think the question is, what takes you so deep that killing your children's a good idea?
Oh,
I mean? Unless, like you said, it would have to be, the closest I've seen, and many of them are religion related, that somehow that was going to take them to heaven and we were all going to be together. Mother and child were going to be together or something of that nature is the closest I've probably seen on that. So it'll be interesting for your listeners to watch.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that religious concept of let's all go to heaven and, I think that the jury could convict on that easier than on this case. I don't know. That's just me. I could be wrong, but I want to play a clip from the arraignment, and this sort of, the reason I'm playing it is I want to give you a taste of what the prosecution is relying on and what you think, and then I'm going to play a little bit of a clip from Kevin Reddington, who is an amazing lawyer here in Massachusetts. So let's see. Let me take this down, and quickly though, this is what Lindsay Clancy is going to look like in front of those jurors in that wheelchair. So that'll be interesting. So, all right, I'm going to play a little bit of a clip and tell me what you think. So let's see.
At 5:33 p.m. and she did not answer the phone. She then calls him back at 5:34 p.m. and the call lasted 14 seconds. He's there at the store unsure of which medication to get, and she tells him exactly what she wants. He had no issues communicating with her. It was a completely normal call, although he did mention that she seemed like she was in the middle of something. He is on surveillance footage during this time, exiting that aisle and appeared to be using his phone. He then heads to the register, makes his purchase, and leaves the store at 5:37 p.m. He's next seen on footage at 3V restaurant at 5:54 p.m. He picks up the food and he's out of there within a minute. When he arrives home, the first thing he noticed was the silence. He did not see or hear the defendant or the children. He actually called her cell phone at 6:09 p.m. looking for them, and she did not answer. He went to their bedroom on the second floor and the door was locked. He was able to open it, and when he looked inside, he saw blood on the floor in front of a full-length mirror and the window open. He immediately runs downstairs and into the backyard, where he finds the defendant laying on the ground. She appeared to have cuts on her wrists and neck, but he stated to 911 that those wounds were no longer bleeding. She was conscious. He called 911. During this time, he asked the defendant, "What did you do?" She responded to him, "I tried to kill myself and jumped out the window." During the 911 call, Patrick can be heard asking the defendant, "Where are the kids?" He later told police that she replied, "In the basement." So immediately after this happened, she knew what she had done and she knew where the kids were. When EMS arrived, he asked them to stay with her so he could go find his kids. The 911 call kept going.
Well, I'm not going to play this part because it's a little bit too graphic for YouTube. But what I think prior to this, she kept saying that Lindsay Clancy appeared normal. She played in the snow with the kids. They built a snowman. She had conversations with her parents and other people, and she acted completely normal. So they're trying to show that this is a deliberate, premeditated act of first-degree M. And, you know, what do you think about that? Do you think the fact that she acted normal throughout the day and leading up to this, and she was able to tell Patrick where the kids were? Do you think that?
I think that it goes to, you know, and each state has a little different definition of insanity and some variations, you know, but like I said before, the way we always had to tackle it was, you know, did you know legal and moral right from legal and moral wrong, the McNaughton standard, right? And so what I think this gives you is, and I used to use, you know, he was able to dial the phone, or he was able to, you know, the defendant was able to drive his car. He didn't violate any traffic laws. You know, he stopped at stop signs, you know, things of that nature. And I think this sounds like in that similar vein that, you know, she's lucid, you know, it goes back to what you were saying. You know, she didn't come with, you know, I jumped out the window because Satan was after me, or the aliens were getting me, and the, you know, the house is haunted, or, you know, anything like that. It was lucid to the point she made concrete decisions, and she made concrete decisions. It obviously sounds like in conjunction with the crime she committed in the basement. And so I think there's going to be some difficulty in saying that she didn't know right from wrong and she didn't know what she was doing. Now, with that being said, it goes kind of what we led into is, did she make a decision, a horrible, horrible decision? You know, absolutely. May she have felt overwhelmed or whatever the case may be, but she knew she shouldn't have been doing what she did, in that she was lucid. Doesn't mean she didn't justify in her mind what she did, but now we're in a court of law, and, you know, what we as a society are willing to tolerate.
Yeah. I completely get your point there. And let me play a little bit now from Kevin Reddington. And it's really interesting. I think he's such a great attorney. So we'll see what he says. And then I want to get your ideas on this. got to get there first. And it's right about here. Okay.
And with whom she's interacted. She wrote a note on her phone the day before killing the children, stating that she had, quote, a touch.
Hold on. Kevin Richardson is supposed to be, oh, I see. All right. Right way up here. I was looking at the wrong number. 1 second. Here is Kevin around. There we go. All right.
Becoming depressed, suffered from significant anxiety, as a result of which she consulted with a number of doctors. A number of doctors indicated that she would be able to sleep, she would be able to feel, she would be able to emote once these medications kicked in. And again, as I say, our medical in our society completely abandons women with this condition. It's easy to say, come on, you have a healthy baby. You have a wonderful husband. You're able to take care of your kids in your home. You're lucky. Take the pills, you'll be okay. Well, they put her on a number of medications. They put her on Prozac, which Your Honor is well aware, is known as SSRI, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. Your Honor knows that along with some of these medications, they have the black box warning from the FDA, may cause suicidal ideation, may cause homicidal ideation. She was on Ativan. She was on Benadryl. And then she ended up being told, okay, because she was complaining about the effects of the Prozac, they said, stop the Prozac, we'll find something else. They put her on Remeron. Then they added on Seroquel. And Your Honor, I attached from Dave Benjamin, the toxicologist, some papers with the submission. And Your Honor can see the side effects that this does. She was having bad thoughts. She was having worsening depression. Her husband suffered through that phase. Her parents were well aware of the fact that she was suffering from this depression and depressive phase. She wasn't sleeping. She ended up, at some point, Your Honor, December 31st, she was on Seroquel. They told her then the Valium would be stopped. She was a shell of herself, no personality, and went to the doctor again. The doctor again prescribes the Seroquel, and then they took her off the Seroquel. And then she went to the doctor, and at that point, they prescribed trazodone, Ativan, amitriptyline, right up to the very end, when she was so bad that she voluntarily turned herself in, if you will, to the McLean Hospital. We know that that's a psychiatric hospital. She was at the McLean Hospital for a period of about 5 days. While at the McLean Hospital, they basically tried to get her off the Seroquel. She wanted to get off the benzodiazepines. She felt that she was being addicted to the benzodiazepines. She then ends up on trazodone, Ativan. Her mood was terrible after she got out of McLean Hospital. She still had the suicidal thoughts. As the government has indicated, she even told her husband that she had suicidal thoughts. You think this is something that she's planning to kill these 3 kids by going and getting a menu, going on to Google Maps or whatever it is, and finding out the distance? When she tells her husband she's having suicidal thoughts, probably a month prior, thoughts of hurting her children, they go to the doctor again, and she's on the medications, on and off, on and off. This is a significant issue between the postpartum depression as well as possibility of postpartum psychosis that is pretty much ignored. But nevertheless, with the overlay of the SSRIs and the history, and Your Honor has some emails and things that people would reach out to me from all over the world, indicating that their daughter had the same problem, that they had the same problem. Your Honor is well aware that many times when people are on Prozac or on SSRIs, workplace violence, homicides, family homicides.
So what do you think based on that?
I think that I can anticipate a defense that in part at least puts the system on trial, that they weren't able to help her. Now, I again know that sometimes the doctors do take the shotgun approach with mental health, because I think, it's like if I got a broken bone, you can see it, you can know what to do. But I think the mental health thing is a tough it's a tough nut to crack. And I think that's why oftentimes I think that society, part of society is underserved. And so I think he's got, fertile ground to kind of do. The system failed her. But again, for me, the break point is you were able to kill the kids, but not able to take your own life. And that's where you lose me a little bit. What is the justification? What is the justification? Because like you said, if you delineate out, a psychotic episode to the point that, I thought there were three little monsters and they were going to, get my real children or whatever, then perhaps you have something. But again, it sounds like, it's going to be kind of a reversal where the prosecution is making sure you're not deciding it based on sympathy or emotion and all of that. And I think they've got to bring it back to that. I know the husband has spoken kindly of her and and supportive, but I also know he'll be a fact witness, and that gets a little tricky for the prosecutor too. When you put up a witness, but you're trying to not let the horse out of the barn, and so that'll be an interesting testimony too, and see both how the state and the defense handle that.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And I think people in Massachusetts are divided. I've talked to my girlfriends about it. So I want to get to that, what kind of juror you would like for this case if you're on the prosecution. But I feel like just amongst my girlfriends, most of them couldn't convict her. But then there's some that are adamant that could. So I don't know. I think that's going to be a big battle in the jury deliberation room.
I think you're right. I don't think it's a slam dunk. I think that you've got, it's strange. It's like you said, it's not the fact that she did it. It's almost kind of a mitigation battle. And so if I was in closing argument to the jury, I'd be reminding them that, that you can still have, even though we tell them not to have passion, prejudice, sympathy, you can have sympathy for what she went through. You can have sympathy for her current condition. What you can't do is discount 3 lives because she was battling her own demons. And I think you keep it that. So I remember I told a young prosecutor in my office one time, I said, Brad, sometimes a case is a murder or nothing. You'll be in front of a jury, said, ladies and gentlemen, they may tell you about lesser included. If you think it's lesser included, just say not guilty. But I said, sometimes when the 2 crack dealers shoot each other, you say, this could be a murder, this could be a manslaughter. This is why we have our system, so you jurors can decide. You have to kind of pick your battles. And I think the prosecution has got to be careful going all in. See, for me, going back to the Susan Smith thing, by the time we tried it, and I give the defense credit, I was 32 when I tried it. I just got elected. I told somebody I was the Doogie Howser of prosecutors, but anyway, the one thing the defense did that, I was probably a little bit naive is they worked the jury pool, they worked the public opinion where Susan went from Susan the monster to Susan the victim. And, we had a gag order, but they'd leak things out. And I laughed when they leaked her mental health evaluation, and it put, Susan suffered from depression and this, that, and other. And my defense was going to be if they thought I leaked it, because we even had the reporter, that won't give up their sources and had a sideshow on that. I said, if I'd leaked it, I'd leaked the part that said she's not insane and she knows right from wrong, Yeah. So they leaked out and they worked the jury pool. So by the time we got there, it was Susan, poor Susan. And I mean, I could go deeper. I told him I've become a lay psychologist over all these years of talking about it. But, these kind of cases make us uncomfortable because every day when I go to work, when my kids were little, I left them with my wife, no thought about it. Figured they were safe as they could possibly be, probably safer with her than they would be with me because she pays more attention,
Right.
But so we want to find, as a juror, kind of going back to your juror question, we want to find something that makes us comfortable that it won't happen to us. So like in our case, people would have almost accepted it more if it had been the carjacker, or strangely, even if the husband does it. Like people couldn't believe I'd seek the death penalty against poor Susan. Well, I said if the black guy had done it, they would seek the death penalty against me if I didn't do it.
Right.
David Smith, the father, had done it. And so
Mhm.
I think it is unsettling to us when mothers do this. So I think your jurors try extra hard to go find alternatives that to explain why, because the problem with this defendant, the problem with Susan Smith, they could be our secretary, our sister, our friend from church. It's not like the boogeyman. At least the boogeyman, you can lock the door and get a gun or something,
Yeah.
But I think it's the enemy within thing that scares people the most. But going back to Susan, the defense did a great job of painting poor Susan. And I remember a reporter, somebody asking me, well, now that the case and the jury came back and gave her life, and they said, what's your theory of the case? And I'm going, my theory, I don't make up theories just because it's, sounds good. The boyfriend thing, and I don't want children, and her doing that, there's no doubt, and the problem is, as in the courtroom, sometimes her behavior when the jury wasn't in and her behavior when the jury was in the box were two different things too, but
Yeah.
they orchestrated, poor Susan. I laugh, and this sounds sarcastic, but I've never had a mental health evaluation. Our state hospital was always so liberal. That was our doctors. We couldn't get independent back in the day. And our state hospital doctor came, and it was about competency. For your listeners, of course, competencies, whether I can participate now, whether I can help my attorney now, versus was I competent or sane at the time of the crime. Anyway, he comes in and says, and I've never seen this, and the only reason I can think they orchestrated this was because everybody expected to hear Susan tell her story, and they were coming up with a reason she wouldn't testify because they didn't want me to cross-examine her.
Hell
And
yeah.
they said, Susan is so suicidal that if she was in front of the jury, she would request death. And so she's competent to testify. I'm competent to aid her counsel, but she's not competent to testify because she would request death. And I laughed because that case had everything. We had a bomb threat during the case, and I'm not making light of bomb threats, but at that point, as a prosecutor, you're carrying the burden of proof. You're having to prove everything. As soon as the one witness over, they're asking you for your next witness, and we had the bomb threat, and Susan Smith rushed out of the courtroom, and I was going, well, hell, if she's that suicidal, let her stay here with me and help her carry my stuff, but again, not to make light of that or
No,
depression,
right.
suicide, but it
Jeez.
was, in her case, it was a facade. I think the case you're working on, it's a little deeper reality there than would have been in the Smith case.
Yeah. I either way, I mean, I thought in your case, Susan Smith, I thought one of the things first of all, that was back in 1995. Well, first of all, I didn't have kids yet at that point, but I just remember you saying she had, what was it, 6 minutes to save her children as the car sunk? That stuck with me.
Yeah, I always tell people, and I was trying to think of a variation in the case at hand, but I said, if Susan Smith had shown up to that house that she ran to from the lake and she had been wet, or she had been scraped up from diving down the car, because this was a steep ramp. In other words, something that told me at least at some point she was really, and I'm not saying contemplating suicide. We've always thought, it's a variation that, here at the house, we wish Jesus would hurry up and get here. I'm not going to speak like the country song that everybody wants to go to heaven. Nobody wants to go now. But if Jesus was coming, it'd be okay. So I respect that people have thought about it, but she didn't do, there's what we call suicidal gestures, which are sometimes crying out for help. And again, I noticed on this case, the old suicidal gesture would be a cut like this case, but not one that could really kill you, because I gotta believe, and again, not making light of suicide, but if she'd wanted to end her life with a knife or a weapon or something, she had the opportunity. Again, not making light of that.
Yeah. Right.
And so I always said, if Susan had shown up to the house wet, if she had shown up to the house with her throat closed and just said, I did a horrible thing, you know, I don't know what I was thinking, I rolled my kids in the lake, you and I'd probably never be talking about the case.
I don't
Because
know. I still think you would have gotten a conviction.
No, I'm saying it
Yeah.
probably would have been, you know, because I wouldn't come off the death penalty. I think it would have, because
Right.
my whole position was kind of going back to the David Smith carjacker thing.
Yeah.
Whatever the maximum penalty that we had, even if we didn't have the death penalty, that's what I thought she deserved. One, from the crime itself. Two, from the deceit. And you know, she left those kids in the lake 10 days that arguably she wouldn't have had to, you know.
I forgot
I was
about
there
that
the
part.
night they pulled them out of the lake.
Oh my God.
And I saw grown men that worked with SLED and women, you know, crying. And I intentionally did it. I've gone to plenty of crime scenes and been plenty when I was a police officer, but I knew because of the media and everything, this one was just going to be a little bit different, even though I've tried plenty of other cases. And I wanted to see those boys to remember what I was there for. Again, not to be vengeful, but just kind of stay focused, because there's no doubt. And you know, the great and horrible of being a prosecutor is you hold the case in your hands. You can reduce it, you can dismiss it. And so it's almost the old having the key to my own jail cell. I'd wake up some days and dread would just be washing over me, you know, with all that I was having to deal with. And I think about those boys. And, you know, to me, I did have a son back then. I guess Logan was about 2 or 3. And
oh my God.
I always remember what a pain in the rear end car seats were. And swapping my car seat, you know, out of my car and put it in your car. And, you know, I'll say, hey, just take my car just so you didn't have to mess with the car seat. And I thought all the things we do as parents to make sure they're safe, the irony in our case that they were wrapped in the protection of a car seat is what took them to their death was overwhelming too.
It was awful. It was just awful. And then this too, with the exercise bans and I don't know, it'll be a close case, but the prosecution will definitely get into how long they'll get the autopsy and how long it took each one of them to die. So that's going to be significant.
All that is, you know, I mean, that's up close and personal. You know what I mean? I'll say even rolling them in the lake, you're not physically laying hands on them like you are, you know, with the exercise bans.
Right. Right. I know you're right. Either way, it's just awful. What kind of juror would you pick if you're the prosecutor in this case?
You know, in South Carolina, we don't have voir dire. And so you learn very little, you know, about jurors, you know, so, as a prime example, in my jury, the police chief's wife was on the jury, and I still didn't get the death penalty. So, you know, at some point, you know, but, you know, Union was a small town. There was some thought, you know, that plays into, you know, you're going to see Susan's mom at the grocery store. You know, it's better if we just end this thing. And so, you know, there was some of that. So I guess, you know, the one thing you were saying, and it cuts both ways. I was thinking about your friends and talking about your friends talking about, you know, they didn't think they would convict. And it kind of reminds me back at Smith, you know, some people said, you know, I battled depression, or I went through this, or I went through that, or I was on Prozac, or whatever the case may be, but I still wouldn't kill my child. And I think that's the biggest thing so there's pros and cons. There's mothers. I mean, you could even go as far as and that's why the prosecution's got to be careful. You could go as far as mothers who have had postpartum depression, and I think they could appreciate it, but still recognize I never would kill my child. I might have thought, I wish I didn't have children, but I would have not taken their life. So I think, you know, for me, people used to laugh. And after I came out in the civil world, one of the attorneys I was helping, it was a personal injury thing. And he said, remember the juries you used to pick? I said, yeah. He said, pick me just the opposite. He wants the Jerry Springer watchers and stuff. But I think in this, you know, you want just a good, solid citizen, you know, that has an interest in justice. And you and I wouldn't be talking about if justice was clear cut here, but
I know.
there's a lot of factors at play.
Oh, definitely. Well, thank you so much. I'd love to have you back on during the case. I'll be broadcasting that one actually from New York.
Ah,
Now I'm in Boston, but it'll be very hot in the city, and you'll probably be, enjoying yourself down in South Carolina, and I'll be in
right.
New York. But I really appreciate your insight here, and I think you've been so helpful to all the listeners about this tragic case. So we'll see
It
what
was
happens.
it was an honor
Yeah.
to be with you, and
Oh,
I think I saw some of your listeners responding, and I think it's important that we don't ever take this as theater. We maybe take it as a means of understanding the human condition, and
yeah.
and so I think people's interest can provide a good point too, rather than just kind of rubbernecking as you go by.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And then some people were asking me about the Malete case out in California. I did make another video. This is my third video today, believe it or not. I did lunchtime law, then I did Malete again. And then I'm doing this one, but there's closing arguments in that case. It's a big case out of California. So circumstantial, no body, no crime scene, no weapon. It's gonna be tough. So I've
That's
been
why,
following.
when I got elected at 30 years old, and the beautician said the one thing she was concerned, I didn't look old enough. I said, "Don't worry, if I get the job, it'll take care of itself."
You
So when
still
you
don't look old. I don't know what it is. I think it's something in the water down in South Carolina, because I remember watching you back then and you still look the same. So
Oh, well, I used to tease with my black hair all combed down and media all around me. I said it looked like if Pee Wee Herman went to law school.
oh my God, that's funny. Well, again, thank you so much, Tommy, and
Absolutely.
enjoy your evening with your family.
Thank you, ma'am. You too, and I'll be glad to come see you anytime.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, good night.